Ever get that feeling, like you're rereading a familiar story, but suddenly, this time, something new jumps out at you? That's what we're doing today, kind of taking a deep dive into a story you probably know, a young Jesus visiting the temple in Jerusalem. But this time, oh boy, with some really surprising new layers.
And the source we're looking at today, well, it might surprise you too. It's not from the Bible.
No.
We're going with a book called the Urantia Book.
Okay. Now, before anyone goes thinking we've totally gone off the deep end here,
Right.
We're not going to get into the whole debate about, where this book came from or its whole message. But what we are interested in is how it portrays this event in Jesus's life and really what unique insights it might offer.
Exactly. Think of it this way. Even if you know the Gospels account like the back of your hand, looking at different versions of the same story, it's like it can give you that richer understanding of the whole context.
Yeah.
The culture, the beliefs people had back then, the historical setting.
All right, so picture this. It's the 1st century, you're in Palestine, and a 12-year-old Jesus is on his first big trip to Jerusalem. It's for Passover, of course.
Huge deal.
Huge E. Now, this isn't just a family vacation, right? This is for Jewish people, a huge E deal. It's like a pilgrimage, but also kind of like a coming-of-age ceremony, all rolled into one.
Absolutely. This pilgrimage, it marked a significant transition in a young person's life, signifying their growing responsibility within their faith, their community. It's a big step.
Okay, and here's where the Urantia book, it throws in a really intriguing detail. It wasn't just Jesus and his parents making the journey, see? It describes a whole group from Nazareth traveling together. And get this, there were a surprisingly large number of women in the group.
That's a detail worth noting. While we can't say for sure what it means for certain, it could suggest maybe a more inclusive social dynamic than what we typically associate with that time period. At least when it came to religious pilgrimages, it makes you wonder.
Yeah, fascinating. So they finally arrive in Jerusalem. And young Jesus, you got to figure he's full of excitement, maybe a little nervous even. He finally enters the temple, and you'd think it'd be this serene spiritual place.
Yeah, you'd expect that given, I guess, our modern perception of what a religious space should be, peaceful and all.
Right. But the Urantia book, it paints a very different picture. Instead of peaceful reflection, it describes the scene. It's really something. It's loud, it's chaotic, crowds of people everywhere, animals are being bought and sold. You can practically hear the money changers clinking their coins. It's that vivid. And even the priests, according to this account, they seem, more caught up in the rituals themselves than, actual genuine devotion.
Yeah, and this is where I think we see one of the first hints of that conflict that will really come to define Jesus's ministry later on. It's this tension between the idealized vision of faith, right? And then the messy reality of religious institutions. Almost as if this experience, this whole thing, maybe it planted a seed of disillusionment in young Jesus. And that makes you wonder.
Yeah. And it's not just the overall atmosphere either. The Urantia book specifically mentions Jesus being really bothered, deeply disturbed by the commercialism. He sees it everywhere in the temple, people buying and selling animals for sacrifice, right there in this holy space.
And you got to remember, this whole encounter kind of foreshadows that pivotal moment in Jesus's later ministry when he famously drives the money changers out of the temple. It really makes you wonder if this early experience, if that's what fueled his anger, his desire to cleanse what he saw as this corruption of faith. It's an interesting link.
That's a really good point. So instead of finding peace and enlightenment, young Jesus walks into, it sounds more like a chaotic marketplace than a holy temple. What happens next? I gotta know.
Well, according to the Urantia book, this whole experience, as jarring as it was, it kind of ignites this spark, this intellectual curiosity in Jesus. It's like he's suddenly confronted with all the complexities of his faith, right? And he's not afraid to start asking questions.
Okay, so he doesn't just run back to Nazareth and tell everyone the temple was a bust. He stays.
Oh, he stays. In fact, he stays behind and spends, get this, an entire week completely engrossed in temple life. The Urantia book describes him engaging in these deep conversations, attending debates, just absorbing knowledge like a sponge. It's quite something.
So he's just hanging out with these scholars, soaking up all their wisdom. That's not exactly the image that comes to mind when I think about a 12-year-old.
Yeah.
You got that right. Not your typical preteen activity, is it? But we got to remember, right? This is the ancient world we're talking about. Learning, debating religious texts, all that. It was huge in that culture. And it seems young Jesus, he had a knack for it even then.
Okay, so he's asking his questions, learning from the best. But then what? He's just like becomes this mini scholar, totally content with everything he's hearing.
Not exactly. This is where it gets really interesting. The Urantia book suggests, see, that while Jesus was, oh yeah, definitely eager to learn, he wasn't afraid to,
Yeah.
poke at things a little, challenge the status quo maybe. He starts questioning some of the core stuff, the bedrock of his faith, stuff that seems to have been bothering him even from a young age, really.
Like what? Give me an example. What kind of things are we talking here?
Well, for instance, he questions animal sacrifice, which you got to remember that was like the central part of temple worship back
Yeah.
then. And think about it. This is the kid who, if we look at the Gospels, later calls himself a shepherd,
Right.
caring for his sheep. So even at 12, just the idea of sacrificing innocent animals had to have felt, I don't know, just wrong to him.
Yeah, I know it tracks. It's like those core values, they were always there, shaping his way of seeing the world.
Exactly. And it wasn't just the sacrifices either. He also questioned why they were stuck in separate areas of the temple. Like there was something just not right about it.
Yeah.
Which, again, hints at that sense of fairness, that inclusiveness, well, it becomes a huge part of his whole message later, doesn't it?
Yeah, totally. So he's not just this passive little student. He's really engaging with these huge, complex issues, even challenging traditions that had been around for centuries. I mean, I got to wonder what those scholars thought. Having this outspoken kid in their midst probably drove him a little crazy, right?
You can imagine. Had to cause a stir. And it gets, well, more intense. The Urantia book claims that Jesus' questions, his pushback, it actually escalates into full-on debates.
Yeah.
With these guys, the most respected religious figures of the time, says for 3 days straight, this 12-year-old is holding court in the temple, going toe-to-toe with them on matters of faith, scripture, even the very nature of God.
Hold on, well, 3 days, a 12-year-old debating these guys, the top dogs. That sounds kind of hard to believe, to be honest. Are we meant to take that literally?
It's definitely a bold claim. Got to give him that. And we don't have any other historical sources to back it up, that's for sure. But it's still a powerful image, don't you think? Just imagine the sheer audacity, this young boy questioning the wisest men of his time. Whether it happened exactly like that or not, it highlights something important about Jesus. He was never afraid to challenge assumptions, to speak truth to power, even as a kid.
Okay, I'm hooked. So we've got young Jesus, deep in theological debate, shaking things up. It's a side of him you don't often hear about, that's for sure. But eventually, his parents are going to realize he's not with the tour group anymore.
Oh, true, yeah. And can you picture the panic when they finally get back to the temple, searching everywhere for their son?
Yeah.
The Urantia book really gets into it, the details, the raw emotion of it all. You can practically feel it.
So they find him safe and sound in the middle of some intense theological throwdown with the bigwigs.
Exactly. There he is, cool as a cucumber, just calmly discussing things with these guys, these scholars. The very people Mary and Joseph would consider, the pillars of their faith. Must have been, I don't know, a relief, but also totally bewildering for them.
I bet they're probably thinking, there you are, we've been worried sick, and what in the world have you been doing? So what does Jesus say for himself? Does he apologize for, scaring them half to death?
Well, funny enough, according to the Urantia book, it's Mary who speaks first. And her words, man, they're so relatable. That mix of relief and mom exasperation, Son, she asks, why have you treated us like this? Your father and I, we've been searching for you and we've been so worried.
Oh, man. I can only imagine, right? Poor Mary. It's like that classic Lost in the Mall story. But yeah, with way higher stakes. Ha ha ha. And then to find your kid just calmly debating theology with like the intellectual elite, I wouldn't even know where to begin. Hug him or ground him.
Right. Talk about a parenting dilemma, haha. But Jesus' response is really something. He doesn't make excuses or anything, and he doesn't back down from what he did either. He just kind of calmly tells Mary and Joseph, look, I'm just about my father's business. That's all.
Wow. So even at 12, he's already got this sense of like a higher calling, this purpose that goes way beyond what anyone else expects of him. That's powerful stuff.
No kidding. And this is where the story takes us to a really pivotal moment. Okay, picture this. Young Jesus, he's standing on the Mount of Olives, overlooking Jerusalem. It's here, according to the Urantia book, that he has this really profound experience, kind of like a spiritual awakening,
Okay, so we've gone from a crowded, kind of chaotic marketplace to these deep theological debates, and now we're on a mountaintop looking out over Jerusalem. I'm definitely sensing a theme here. What happens next? This is where it gets good, right?
This is it. Jesus, He's overcome with emotion, and he makes his powerful declaration. He talks about the struggles of Jerusalem, how much the people are longing for liberation,
Yeah.
and he talks about his own role in what's to come. And get this, he doesn't just talk about kicking out the Romans, there's that, but he also talks about something much deeper, like freeing his people from these rigid traditions that he sees them trapped in, freeing them from the very systems that he thinks are corrupting their faith.
Wait, so hold on. He's not just talking about a political revolution. It's like he wants a revolution of the heart, like a total transformation, how they think about God, faith, everything.
Exactly. And that's what makes this account so fascinating, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Even if we don't take it completely literally, it suggests that Jesus, even as a young guy, was already wrestling with these big questions, the limitations of organized religion, how things were being done. He was already picturing a better way, a way that was more just, more compassionate. It's pretty amazing.
It's like he's laying the foundation right then and there for the message he'll preach later. Love, forgiveness, radical inclusivity. It's all there, but in this 12-year-old kid.
Totally. And while we can't, hop in a time machine and get inside his head for real, the Urantia book gives us this really intriguing possibility, this idea that his message, this message of love and liberation, it wasn't just something he preached about. It was something he lived, something he struggled with from the very beginning.
Man, that's pretty powerful. So where does that leave us? We've gone deep on this text, this not exactly conventional book. What are we taking away from this deep dive?
I think the big takeaway, and this is true no matter what you believe, is that even these stories, the ones we think we know by heart, they can surprise us. When we look at them through a new lens, there's always more to find. The Urantia book's version of Jesus' younger years. Maybe it's literal, maybe it's metaphorical, but either way, it makes you think. It challenges us to look beyond those simplified stories and really wrestle with the complexity of his journey, just like he did.
It's a good reminder that everyone, even someone as extraordinary as Jesus, well, they started out as kids, wrestling with big questions, pushing back against the way things were, and finding their own path.
Couldn't have said it better. And hey, who knows? Maybe this will even get some of our listeners doing some deep dive into their own. There's always something new to learn, a new perspective to consider, another story just waiting to be uncovered. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.